For centuries, the galaxy agreed on one absolute truth. The Kael'thari language could not be learned. It wasn't arrogance that created this belief. It was failure. Repeated, undeniable failure across hundreds of civilizations. The language defied every known system of communication. It wasn't linear. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't even entirely audible. It was layered. Each word carried multiple meanings at once, shaped not only by tone, but by emotional resonance, harmonic vibration, and mathematical cadence. A single phrase could shift depending on the speaker's intent, the listener's perception, and even the surrounding environment. Entire research institutes had dedicated generations to studying it. None succeeded. Even the most advanced artificial intelligences, machines capable of processing entire star system archives in seconds, collapsed under its complexity. Some produced partial translations. Others generated contradictions so severe they rendered the entire language unusable. The Kael'thari never mocked these failures. They didn't need to. Their language spoke for them. It was proof of their superiority, of a civilization so advanced that even their communication had transcended comprehension. So when humanity arrived, newly inducted into the Galactic Council, expectations were modest. Humans were young by galactic standards. Their technology was impressive, but unrefined. Their culture, fragmented. Their behavior, unpredictable. Curious, yes, but not exceptional. The Kael'thari saw an opportunity, a demonstration, a subtle reminder to the Council of where true intellectual dominance lay. During humanity's third official assembly, the Kael'thari delegation made their move. A cultural exchange. That's how they framed it. A gesture of goodwill. The chamber darkened slightly as a stream of Kael'thari linguistic data filled the central display, waves of shimmering sound patterns intertwined with shifting geometric forms. Even to seasoned council members, it was overwhelming. To humans, it should have been incomprehensible. This, the Kael'thari envoy announced, their voice layered with harmonic undertones, is a basic communicative sequence. Basic. The word echoed through the chamber, heavy with implication. Across the hall, the human delegation leaned forward. They didn't speak immediately. They observed. Minutes passed. Then one of them, a woman seated near the center, tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing as if focusing on something just beyond perception. She requested a replay. The data streamed again. This time, she closed her eyes. The council watched with mild curiosity, some with amusement, others with quiet anticipation. After all, they had seen this before. This was always how it began. Hope. Then confusion. Then silence. But something was different. Instead of withdrawing, the human leaned further in. Her fingers moved subtly, tracing invisible patterns in the air. Her breathing slowed, syncing, almost unconsciously, with the rhythm of the data stream. Behind her, other human delegates began murmuring softly, exchanging rapid observations. Layered recursion. Not random, compressed. Wait, there's a base frequency. 3 hours later, the chamber was still full. No one had left, because no one had expected what happened next. The human stood. The murmurs faded instantly. She stepped forward, facing the Kael'thari envoy. For a brief moment there was hesitation, not of fear, but of precision, like someone choosing exactly the right tool for an impossible task. Then she spoke. The sound that left her lips wasn't perfect. It lacked the depth, the richness of true Kael'thari speech. But it was close. close enough that every Kael'thari in the chamber went completely still. The tones aligned. The structure held. The meaning was understood. A greeting. Simple. Clear. Impossible. Silence fell across the Galactic Council. Not confusion. Not skepticism. Silence. Because in that single moment, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in recorded history, a non-Kael'thari had spoken their language and been understood. The envoy stared, their composure cracking for just a fraction of a second. And in that fraction, fear appeared, because what had taken their species centuries to master, humanity had just begun to understand. In hours. At first, the Galactic Council refused to call it what it was. A breakthrough. They called it imitation. A fluke. A clever trick born from pattern mimicry and chance alignment. Because the alternative was unacceptable. The idea that a newly arrived species, barely initiated into interstellar society, could grasp even the surface of the Kael'thari language in a matter of hours threatened centuries of established hierarchy. So they tested it. Again, and again, and again. The Kael'thari delegation, now far more cautious, provided additional sequences, far more complex than the first. Multi-layered constructs with embedded tonal shifts designed to confuse even trained Kael'thari adolescents. The kind of linguistic structures that had broken alien scholars before. The humans asked for no additional tools, no extra time, only data. They studied in silence. This time, the process was faster. 2 hours. Then 1. By the third test, they didn't even wait for the full sequence to finish before responding. And that's when the panic began. Because the humans weren't just repeating sounds. They were predicting them. "You're seeing it too, right?" one human whispered to another, unaware that the chamber's translation systems were still active. "It's not random, it loops," came the reply. "Nested structures. Like compression algorithms." Across the hall, Kael'thari linguists stiffened. Loops? Compression? Those weren't words anyone had ever used to describe their language. The humans continued. "It's recursive," another added. "Each layer references a deeper one, but the rules repeat. Just distorted." That word hit harder than any spoken phrase. Recursive. If something was recursive, it wasn't infinite. It wasn't unknowable. It was structured, learnable, predictable. The Kael'thari envoy felt something unfamiliar twist within their chest. Discomfort. Around the chamber, other species began exchanging uneasy glances. For centuries, they had treated the Kael'thari language as something beyond logic, a form of expression tied to evolution, perception, even biology. But the humans... they were treating it like code, breaking it down, dissecting it, and worst of all, enjoying it. Within 24 hours, the humans requested access to the original datasets again, not to study, to refine. They began mapping tonal patterns against meaning shifts, identifying what they called emotional frequency bands. They charted how slight harmonic variations altered intent, labeling them like variables in an equation. To the Council, it sounded absurd. To the Kael'thari, it sounded dangerous. "They're oversimplifying," one Kael'thari linguist insisted, though their voice carried a hint of uncertainty. "They cannot possibly understand the depth of it." But the evidence said otherwise. When the next exchange began, the humans didn't just respond correctly. They responded creatively. A Kael'thari phrase was delivered, complex, layered, rich with subtle implication. The human reply came seconds later. Not identical. Not mirrored. Improved. The structure was tighter, clearer, more efficient. It carried the same meaning, but without the ambiguity. The chamber erupted into quiet chaos. "That's not possible," one council member muttered. "They altered it," another whispered. "They shouldn't be able to alter it." But they had. And they continued to. By the end of the second day, human linguists were no longer passive participants in the exchange. They were active contributors. They asked questions, deep, unsettling ones. Why does this layer contradict the one beneath it? Is this distortion intentional or emergent? Why embed emotional influence into structural syntax? Each question struck like a fracture forming beneath the surface of something ancient, because no one had ever asked those questions before. Not even the Kael'thari. For them, the language simply was. It had always been that way. But the humans didn't accept, always. They wanted to know why. And in that pursuit, they began uncovering patterns no one else had ever seen. Patterns that suggested the language wasn't just complex. It was constructed, designed. The realization spread slowly through the Kael'thari delegation. Then all at once. Because if the humans were right, if the language had structure beyond natural evolution, then it meant something far worse than being understood. It meant it could be taken apart, rewritten, repurposed. And as the humans continued their analysis, faster now, more confident with each passing hour, the Kael'thari began to feel something they had not experienced in centuries. Not pride, not superiority, but fear. Because humanity wasn't struggling anymore. They were solving. And once humans started solving something, they didn't stop. By the third day, the atmosphere inside the Galactic Council chamber had changed. What began as curiosity had become tension. What had felt like demonstration now felt like exposure. The humans had stopped asking for permission. They simply continued. Their teams no longer sat quietly observing. They moved, coordinated, focused, relentless. Streams of Kael'thari linguistic data filled their systems, broken apart and reassembled in ways no one had attempted before. They weren't just translating anymore. They were digging. And the deeper they went, the more unsettling their findings became. "It doesn't line up with natural evolution," one human analyst stated, projecting a layered model of the language into the chamber. "There are inconsistencies, structural seams where systems overlap." "Overlap?" a council delegate questioned. "Like updates," another human replied. "Different versions stacked on top of each other." The Kael'thari delegation remained silent, but their stillness said everything. Humans continued presenting. They showed how certain tonal patterns didn't originate from the same foundational rules as others, how some layers behaved predictably, while others appeared inserted, almost artificially constrained. "It's modular," the lead human linguist said. Sections of the language were added later, deliberately. A ripple moved through the chamber. Languages didn't work like that. Not naturally. Not at this scale. "Why would anyone construct a language like this?" another species asked. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, she brought up a deeper scan. "What we're about to show," she said carefully, "is beneath everything else." A silence followed. Then the model shifted. The outer layers peeled away. Harmonics, emotional bands, recursive syntax, all stripped back one by one until only a thin, pulsing framework remained. The foundation. At first glance, it looked simple. Too simple. "That's it," someone whispered. The human shook her head. No. That's where it starts. She initiated playback. A Kael'thari phrase, one the council had heard dozens of times, echoed through the chamber. But this time, the humans isolated the base layer beneath it. A faint, almost imperceptible frequency. Barely noticeable. Unless you knew where to look. That signal, the human explained, doesn't carry meaning. It carries influence. Confusion spread instantly. What do you mean, influence? Instead of answering directly, the human ran a simulation. Two identical phrases played. One with the base layer intact. One without. The difference was subtle. Almost impossible to describe. But everyone in the chamber felt it. The first version felt agreeable, trustworthy. The second felt neutral, flat, empty of emotional pull. A low murmur swept across the council. The human's voice cut through it. The Kael'thari language doesn't just communicate ideas, she said. It guides perception. It nudges emotional response. Agreement isn't just reached, it's encouraged. No. A Kael'thari linguist finally spoke, their voice sharp. That is a misinterpretation. But even they sounded uncertain. The human didn't argue. She demonstrated. A recorded Kael'thari negotiation from decades prior played across the chamber, one many recognized. A peaceful resolution between two rival species, long considered a triumph of diplomacy. The humans isolated the base layer again, amplified it. The effect became undeniable. Each key moment in the negotiation, the concessions, the agreements, the trust, aligned perfectly with subtle shifts in that hidden frequency. It wasn't control, not direct, but it was influence, guidance, a shaping of outcome. The chamber erupted. Accusations, shock, denial. This is manipulation. It's embedded in every exchange. How long has this been happening? The Kael'thari delegation said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. For centuries, they had stood as the galaxy's mediators, their language revered as a bridge between species. But now that bridge looked different. Not neutral, not natural, engineered. And the most terrifying part wasn't what the Kael'thari had done. It was what the humans had uncovered. Because if humanity could see the hidden layer, they could understand it. And if they could understand it, they could use it. The human analyst shut down the display, letting silence reclaim the chamber. Then she spoke one final sentence. Quiet, calm, certain. It's not just a language, she said. It's a system. And systems, humanity knew better than anyone, were meant to be taken apart. The Galactic Council did not recover quickly. Even after the chamber was cleared, even after emergency sessions were called and private negotiations began, one truth lingered like a shadow over every discussion. The Kael'thari language had been compromised, not by sabotage, but by understanding. For centuries, it had been the foundation of diplomacy, the bridge between species, the voice through which agreements were formed and conflicts resolved. Now, it was something else, a system with a flaw, and humanity had found it. The Kael'thari retreated into silence. Their delegation no longer engaged openly, no longer offered clarification or defense. Whether out of strategy or shock, no one could tell. But the humans, they didn't retreat. They continued working. Requests were made, access to broader linguistic archives, historical records, older communication logs. Where permission was denied, they relied on what they had already gathered. It was enough. Because once a system was understood, it didn't need to be complete. It needed to be solved. Within another day, humanity returned to the council chamber. This time, there was no demonstration announced. No formal invitation. Just a quiet request for attention. The chamber filled again, faster than before. Not out of curiosity, but necessity. The same human linguist stepped forward, her expression calm, focused. Behind her, a new model of the Kael'thari language appeared, but it looked different. Cleaner, simplified, refined. "We've isolated the manipulative layers," she began, "and removed them." A wave of disbelief rippled through the audience. "Removed?" a council member repeated. "That would destabilize the entire structure." It did, the human admitted. At first. The model shifted, showing fragments collapsing, sections of the language unraveling once the hidden frequencies were stripped away. "But that revealed something important," she continued. "The core system doesn't need them." She initiated a reconstruction. Piece by piece, the language reassembled, this time without the subtle distortions. The recursive patterns remained. The harmonic layers still flowed. But something had changed. It was clearer, more direct. No hidden pressure beneath the words. No influence, she said simply. Just meaning. The chamber sat in stunned silence. Then came the test. A Kael'thari phrase, complex, nuanced, filled with layered intent, was spoken through the system. The human version followed. Different, but unmistakably equivalent. The same message, without the manipulation. "That's—" someone began, then stopped, unable to finish. "It's stable," another whispered. The human nodded. "And transferable." That word hit harder than anything before. Transferable meant anyone could use it. Anyone could learn it. Anyone could speak without being shaped by it. For the first time in history, the Kael'thari language no longer belonged solely to the Kael'thari. Then came the moment that shattered whatever illusion remained. The human stepped forward. No system. No projection. No assistance. And she spoke. Perfect Kael'thari. Not the flawed imitation from days before. Not the experimental variations. Perfect. Every tone aligned. Every harmonic precise. Every layer balanced. But this time, there was something missing. No hidden influence. No emotional pressure. Just clarity. Just intent. The effect was immediate. The chamber didn't react. It froze. Because for the first time, they weren't just hearing the language. They were understanding it. Completely. The Kael'thari envoy rose slowly, their composure strained. "That is not our language," they said. The human met their gaze. "It is now," she replied. No anger. No challenge. Just certainty. Because the truth was undeniable. The system had been opened. The structure understood. The control removed. And in its place, something new had emerged. Not a weapon. Not a tool of influence. But a shared language. The foundation of Kael'thari superiority, the thing that had set them apart for centuries, was gone. Not destroyed. Transformed. And now, anyone could use it. Anyone could master it. Anyone could speak, without being shaped by it. The silence that followed was heavier than any before, because the galaxy had just witnessed something far more dangerous than power. It had witnessed equality. And the Kael'thari, for the first time since they joined the stars, were no longer untouchable. The galaxy did not erupt into war. It unraveled quietly. At first, the changes were subtle, almost imperceptible to those not paying close attention. Trade negotiations that once flowed smoothly through Kael-Theri mediation began to stall, not out of hostility, but uncertainty. For the first time, species were speaking for themselves. Without influence, without guidance, without the invisible hand that had, for centuries, nudged conversations toward resolution. Some called it freedom, others called it chaos. Because clarity, it turned out, was far more difficult than persuasion. Across the Galactic Council, alliances began to shift. Agreements were re-examined. Old treaties, once considered stable, were now questioned. Had those decisions truly been mutual, or had they been guided? No one could say for certain, and that uncertainty spread faster than any conflict ever could. At the center of it all stood humanity, not as rulers, not as enforcers, but as something far more disruptive. Observers, analysts, problem solvers. They didn't issue commands or claim authority. They simply offered tools, the refined Kael-Theri language, now stripped of its hidden layers, shared freely across the galaxy. Many accepted it. Some refused. But no one ignored it, because the implications were too vast. If humans could dismantle and rebuild something as complex as the Kael-Theri language in days, what else could they do? The question echoed in every council chamber, every private transmission, every classified report. And nowhere was that question more urgent than within the Kael-Theri themselves. They had withdrawn from public discourse, their once dominant presence reduced to silence. Their networks, however, remained active, quietly analyzing, reviewing, searching for error, for flaw, for weakness. They found none. The human reconstruction was stable, efficient, complete, and perhaps most unsettling of all, better, not more powerful, not more complex, but more honest. For a civilization that had built its identity around perfection, that truth cut deeper than any accusation. Because they had not been defeated. They had been understood. And in being understood, they had been surpassed. Within restricted Kael-Theri archives, internal discussions grew increasingly urgent. "This cannot continue," one record stated. "Their rate of comprehension is accelerating." "They do not revere complexity," another warned. "They reduce it. That is the threat." The final report was the shortest, and the most chilling. "Do not give humans time." But time was exactly what humanity had. Because they weren't rushing. They weren't forcing change. They were learning, expanding, testing. Already, human researchers had begun applying the same analytical frameworks to other systems, alien technologies, encryption methods, even biological communication patterns. Everywhere they looked, they asked the same question: how does it work? And more importantly, how can it be improved? The galaxy had long believed that certain things were beyond understanding, that complexity itself was a form of protection. Humanity proved otherwise. To them, complexity wasn't a barrier. It was an invitation. Back in the council chamber, now quieter than it had ever been, representatives from dozens of species gathered once more. This time, no Kael-Theri voice guided the discussion. No hidden frequencies shaped the outcome. Just words. Clear, direct, unfiltered. It was slower, messier, but real. At the center of the chamber, a human delegate stood, not above the others, but among them, listening. watching, learning, because that was what made them dangerous. Not their intelligence, not their adaptability, but their persistence. They didn't stop at understanding. They went further. They refined. They rebuilt. They improved. And once they began, they never stopped. Somewhere, deep within Kael'thari space, a final transmission was recorded and sealed away, never meant for the wider galaxy. A warning, not of invasion, not of destruction, but of inevitability. Humanity does not conquer, it read. They redefine. And in a universe built on systems, structures, and carefully maintained complexity, there was nothing more terrifying than a species that could see through it all. Because once humans understood the galaxy would never be the same again.